The suitcase hit the grass with a dull thud, the sound too heavy for something that held only clothes. My dress uniform cap rolled out after it, stopping just short of the driveway like it knew better than to cross the line. Linda stood in the doorway, her face flushed, one hand gripping the frame as if the house itself might slip away from her. "This house belongs to real family members," she shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear, loud enough to make it real. Another box followed, books, this time my mother's books, spilling open across the lawn. I didn't move, I just watched. Then I smiled, small and quiet, and said, "You might want to check the paperwork." A week earlier the house had looked smaller than I remembered. It always does when you come back from somewhere that teaches you to measure space in meters and seconds instead of memories. The driveway was the same cracked concrete I'd learned to ride a bike on the oak tree, still leaning slightly to the left, like it was tired of standing guard. But the front porch, my front porch, felt staged, like a photograph someone had carefully edited after I left. The wind chime my mother loved was gone. In its place hung something metallic and sharp, chiming without warmth, each note too precise. I stood there a moment longer than I should have, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, uniform jacket folded neatly over my arm. Years of training had taught me to assess environments quickly, to look for what didn't belong. This house was full of it. When the door opened, it wasn't my father who greeted me. Linda looked me over from head to toe, her eyes pausing on the army insignia, like she was deciding whether to respect it or ignore it. She chose the latter. "You didn't tell us what time you'd arrive," she said. "Not hello, not welcome home." "I texted Dad," I replied evenly. She stepped aside just enough to let me in, but not enough to make it feel like an invitation. "He's in the kitchen." The smell hit me first. Not the warm, familiar scent of coffee and cinnamon that used to fill mornings here, but something sharper, cleaning chemicals, artificial lemon, something that erased rather than remembered. My boots echoed against the hardwood floor. That hadn't changed, everything else had. The photos along the hallway were different. New frames, new arrangements. My graduation picture was gone. In its place was one of Linda and my father at some charity event, both of them smiling in a way that felt practiced. My mother's photo, the one that used to sit at the end of the hall, was nowhere. I stopped. "Where's Mom's picture?" I asked, my voice quiet but direct. Linda didn't turn around. "We redecorated." That was her answer. In the kitchen, my father stood by the counter, a coffee mug in his hand. He looked older. Not in the way that comes with time, but in the way that comes with avoidance. His shoulders seemed to fold inward when he saw me, like he wasn't sure how to hold himself. "Emily," he said, setting the mug down too quickly, "you're here." "I'm here," I confirmed. There was a pause long enough to notice, short enough to ignore if you wanted to. He didn't step forward, didn't hug me, just nodded like we were meeting at a bank, not in the house I grew up in. "How long are you staying?" Linda asked from behind me. I turned slightly. "I'm on leave for a while." "That's vague." "It's flexible," I said. She crossed her arms. "We've made some changes around here. You'll need to adjust." I didn't respond to that. Instead, I walked down the hallway toward my room. Or what used to be my room. The door was closed. It never used to be closed. I pushed it open slowly, already bracing for what I'd find. A guest room. Neutral colors, fresh sheets, no bookshelves, no desk, no trace of who I had been in that space. Even the window curtains were different, lighter, thinner, letting in more light, as if trying to erase shadows that didn't belong anymore. My duffel bag slipped slightly from my shoulder and I adjusted it without thinking. Military habit: maintain control of your gear even when everything else shifts. "Your things are in storage," Linda said from the hallway. "We needed the room." I turned back to face her. "You needed it for what?" "For guests," she replied simply. "People who actually live here." There it was, clean, direct, meant to land. I nodded once, as if acknowledging an order. "Where's the storage?" "In the garage." Of course it was. I walked past her without another word, through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the garage. The air was cooler there, heavier. My boxes were stacked neatly in one corner, labeled in a handwriting that wasn't mine. I crouched down and opened the nearest one. Books. Not just any books, my mother's books. The ones she used to read to me when I couldn't sleep. The ones she said I should keep because stories matter more than things. They had been packed like things. I ran my fingers over the spines, then closed the box carefully. Anger is loud for most people. For me, it's quiet. It settles in, organizes itself, waits. "Emily," my father's voice called from the doorway. "You don't have to go through all that right now." I stood up slowly. "When were you going to tell me?" "Tell you what?" "That my room was gone. That her things were gone." I held his gaze. "That Mom was gone from this house." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's been years, Em. We had to move on." "Moving on doesn't mean erasing." Linda stepped into the doorway beside him. "No one is erasing anything. We're just updating." I almost smiled at that. Updating, like grief was a software version you could replace. "I'm not a guest here," I said, my tone still calm, still controlled. "This is my home." Linda's expression hardened. "You haven't lived here in years. You chose to leave." "I chose to serve," I corrected. "And we chose to live," she shot back. My father looked between us, his silence louder than anything either of us had said. That was when I knew. This wasn't just about a room, or furniture, or photos. This was about ownership, control, who belonged and who didn't. I picked up one of the boxes, steadying it against my hip. "Where should I put this?" Linda didn't hesitate. "You can keep it in the garage for now." "For now." I nodded again, like I understood something she didn't realize she had just confirmed. "All right," I said, "for now." That night I slept in the guest room that used to be mine. The mattress was too soft, the sheets too new. The house made different sounds, subtle shifts, unfamiliar creaks. I lay there staring at the ceiling, mapping the space in my mind the way I would any new environment. Entry points, exits, weak spots. And one more thing. Proof. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim folder. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. I had carried it with me across states, across bases, across years. Not because I expected to use it, but because my mother had told me to keep it safe. Just in case she had said. I set the folder on the nightstand and turned off the light. In the darkness, the house felt different again. Not smaller this time. Just quieter. Like it was waiting. And for the first time since I stepped through that door, I allowed myself to close my eyes, not to rest, but to prepare. Because some battles don't start with noise. They start with silence. Morning came without ceremony. No smell of coffee drifting through the hallway, no soft clatter of dishes the way it used to when my mother moved through the kitchen before sunrise. Instead, there was silence, thick, deliberate, almost curated. The kind of silence that doesn't happen by accident. I was already awake. Years in uniform had trained my body to rise before the day had a chance to decide anything for me. I made the bed automatically, corners, tight sheets, smooth, small acts of control in a place that didn't feel like mine anymore. When I stepped into the kitchen, Linda was at the counter, scrolling through her phone with a cup of tea in hand. She glanced up briefly, her eyes scanning me the way she had the day before, assessing, not welcoming. "You're up early," she said. "I always am." She nodded like that confirmed something she already believed. "We usually don't start breakfast until later." "I'm not here for breakfast," I replied, moving toward the coffee machine. It wasn't the same one, of course it wasn't. I poured myself a cup anyway, ignoring the slight bitterness that came with it. Some things don't taste right no matter how you adjust. Linda leaned against the counter. "Have you thought about what you're going to do while you're here?" "I have some things to take care of." "That's not what I meant." She set her cup down with a soft but intentional click. "I mean, your living situation?" I met her gaze. "I'm living here." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Temporarily. Before I could respond, my father walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept well. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly unkempt, as if he had run his hands through it one too many times during the night. "Morning," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Morning," I answered. Linda didn't acknowledge him beyond a brief glance. "I was just telling Emily that we should start discussing timelines." My father hesitated. Timelines. For her staying here, Linda clarified her tone, patient, like she was explaining something obvious. "It's not sustainable long term." I took a slow sip of coffee, giving him time to speak. He didn't. Instead, he nodded faintly. "Maybe we can talk about it later." Linda's jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. "We are talking about it now." I set the cup down. "There's nothing to discuss." Her attention snapped back to me. Excuse me? I'm not leaving, I said evenly. The air shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Linda straightened. You don't get to make that decision on your own. I'm not, I replied. I'm making it based on facts. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Facts, Emily, you haven't lived here in years. You don't contribute to this household. You don't pay the mortgage, the utilities. I'm aware of what things cost, I cut in my tone, still calm, still controlled. You don't need to explain it to me. Then you should understand why this isn't your home anymore. My father shifted his weight, looking anywhere but at me. Linda? No, she said, holding up a hand to stop him. She needs to hear this. I watched him, not her. Do you agree with her? I asked. The question hung there simple and direct. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His gaze dropped to the floor. I just think we need to find a solution that works for everyone. That was his answer. It always had been. I nodded once, understood. Linda exhaled, satisfied. Good, then we're all on the same page. We weren't, but she believed we were, and that was enough for her. I picked up my coffee again and finished it in silence. Later that afternoon, I went back into the garage. The boxes were still there, exactly where I had left them. I opened another old photo albums this time. Not the ones on display in the house now, but the real ones. The ones that hadn't been edited. I flipped through them slowly. There was my mother sitting on the front porch, sunlight catching in her hair. There was me, maybe 8 years old, missing a front tooth, leaning against her shoulder. And there in the background, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look, my father watching us. Back then, he looked different, present. I closed the album and set it aside. Going through memories, Linda's voice came from behind me. I didn't turn around, making sure nothing's missing. Oh, everything's there, she said lightly. We didn't throw anything away. We're not that kind of people. That wasn't the reassurance she thought it was. Why is it all out here? I asked. Because it's not part of the house anymore. I stood up slowly and faced her. It is part of the house. No, she said, shaking her head. It was. There's a difference. There it was again, that careful language reshaping reality just enough to make it easier to control. You keep saying the house like it belongs to you, I said. She smiled again, that same thin, practiced smile. Because it does. My eyes held hers. Does it? Her expression flickered for just a second, so fast most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. Of course it does, she replied more firmly now. Robert and I live here. We maintain it. We've invested in it. That's not the same as owning it. Her smile disappeared. What exactly are you implying? Nothing, I said, stepping past her with the photo album in my hands, just asking questions. She turned to follow me. If you have something to say, Emily, you should say it. I paused at the doorway. I will, when it matters. That evening dinner was quieter. My father tried small talk questions about my work, about where I'd been stationed. I answered, but briefly, not cold, just measured. Linda didn't try at all. She watched, observed, waiting. At one point, she set her fork down and looked directly at me. You know, it would be easier if you just made this simple. I met her gaze. What's simple? Finding your own place, she said. Starting your own life outside of this house. I already have a life, I replied. Then go live it, she said, her voice tightening. Because this, she gestured around the room, this isn't it. I set my fork down beside my plate, mirroring her movement. You're right, I said quietly, this isn't it. For a moment she looked almost relieved. Until I continued. But it will be. The silence that followed wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. My father looked up sharply, his eyes finally meeting mine with something close to concern. Emily. I didn't explain, I didn't argue, I didn't need to. Because unlike them, I wasn't guessing. I stood up, took my plate to the sink, and rinsed it off with practiced efficiency. When I turned back around, both of them were still watching me. Linda's expression had shifted again, less confident now, more cautious. Good. Good night, I said, my tone neutral. No one answered. Upstairs in the room that used to be mine, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. The folder was still on the nightstand. I picked it up, running my thumb along the edge. The paper inside was slightly worn, not from use, but from time, from being carried, protected. Just in case. My mother's voice echoed faintly in my memory. I opened the folder just enough to see the top page, not all of it, just the header. It was enough. I closed it again and set it back down. Downstairs, I could hear faint movement voices, low and indistinct. Linda's sharper tone, my father's softer replies. They were talking about me. Planning. They thought they were in control. I turned off the light and lay down staring into the dark. Tomorrow I decided I would let them. Because sometimes the fastest way to end a fight is to let the other side believe they've already won. By the third morning, the house had settled into a rhythm that didn't include me. Doors closed a little faster when I walked by. Conversations shifted the moment I entered a room. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Linda wasn't the type to create chaos without purpose. She preferred something more controlled, something quieter, the kind of pressure that builds slowly until you either adapt or leave. I adapted. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. I made my bed. I kept to my space. I answered when spoken to, and I didn't offer more than necessary. In uniform, restraint isn't just discipline, it's strategy. You don't show your hand unless you're ready to play it. Linda mistook that for compliance. That was her first mistake. The second came that afternoon. I was in the garage again, reorganizing my boxes. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to know exactly what had been touched, moved, repacked. There's a difference between storage and displacement. I needed to understand which one I was dealing with. Still going through those, Linda's voice cut in light but edged. I didn't look up, inventory. She laughed softly. You make it sound like a deployment. It is, I said, just a different kind. That seemed to amuse her. She stepped further into the garage, heels clicking against the concrete, deliberate. You know, Robert and I talked last night. I closed the box in front of me and stood. About you, she said plainly. About what comes next. I leaned one shoulder against the shelving unit, waiting. We think it would be best if you started making arrangements to move out, she continued. Soon. How soon? A few days, she replied. A week at most. That's more than reasonable. I nodded slowly as if considering it. And if I don't? Her expression sharpened. Then we'll have to make it clear that you're not welcome here. Make it clear how? Linda took a step closer. Emily, don't do this. You're a smart woman. You understand how things work. You don't live here. You don't have any legal standing to stay. There it was. Not emotional, not personal. Legal. I almost smiled. Is that what you believe I asked? It's not belief, she said. It's reality. I pushed off the shelf and picked up one of the boxes, carrying it toward the back wall. All right. That was all I said. Behind me, I could feel her watching, trying to read something she couldn't quite access. When I didn't give her anything more, she turned and left, the sound of her heels fading back into the house. That evening, things escalated. Not suddenly, not explosively, just inevitably. I came back from a short run habit more than necessity to find the front door open and my belongings scattered across the porch. At first it didn't register. My brain processed it the way it would any unexpected scene details, first meaning later. A jacket draped over the railing. A box tipped sideways, contents spilling out onto the wooden boards. A pair of boots, my boots set neatly by the steps like they'd been placed there on purpose. Then the meaning hit. I walked forward slowly, each step measured. Linda stood in the doorway, arms crossed, chin lifted. Behind her I could see movement, my father hovering just out of sight, not quite stepping in, not quite stepping away. You're early, she said. I didn't realize I had a curfew, I replied. Her gaze dropped briefly to my hands, then back to my face. We've made your situation clear. You chose not to listen. I set my keys down on the porch railing. And this is your solution. This is me enforcing boundaries, she said, her voice rising just enough to carry. This house belongs to real family members. There it was again. The phrase she'd been building toward. I looked past her directly at my father. Did you help her with this? He shifted, stepping slightly into view. His face was pale, his expression tight. Emily, maybe we should just answer the question, I said, not raising my voice. He hesitated. That was enough. I nodded once and turned back to Linda. You're making a mistake. She let out a short, sharp laugh. No, I'm correcting one. Then she reached behind her, grabbed another box, one I recognized immediately, and threw it forward. It hit the edge of the porch and split open. Books spilled out across the wood, sliding, falling, landing in a loose, careless pile. My mother's books. Something in my chest tightened, but my face didn't change. Linda stepped forward, her voice louder now, sharper, meant to cut. You don't get to walk back into this house after years away and act like nothing's changed. You don't get to claim space that isn't yours. Neighbors were starting to notice. A curtain shifted across the street. A car slowed slightly as it passed. Good. Say it again, I said quietly. What? That line I clarified about the house. Her eyes flashed. She took another step forward, fully committing now. This house belongs to real family members. Silence followed the words, heavy and expectant. I let it sit there for a moment. Then I bent down, picked up one of the books, and brushed a bit of dirt off the cover. The movement was slow, careful, intentional. When I straightened, I met her gaze. And smiled. Not wide, not mocking. Just enough. You might want to check the paperwork, I said. For the first time since I'd come home, Linda hesitated. It was small, a flicker, but it was there. What are you talking about? She demanded. I set the book back into the broken box and reached for my duffel bag, pulling out the slim folder I had carried with me for years. This I said simply. She didn't take it. Instead, she crossed her arms tighter as if that would protect her from something she didn't yet understand. I'm not interested in whatever you think you have. You should be, I replied. My father stepped forward, then drawn in despite himself, his eyes fixed on the folder, recognition dawning slowly like a memory he had tried not to access. Emily, he said, his voice lower now, uncertain. I didn't look at him, not yet. Go ahead, I told Linda, extending the folder slightly. Open it. She stared at it, then at me. This doesn't change anything. Open it, I repeated. Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, with a sharp exhale, she reached out and took the folder from my hand. Her fingers tightened around it as if she expected it to resist. She flipped it open, her movements quick, almost aggressive. At first, her expression didn't change. Then it did. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Her eyes slowed as they moved across the page. Her brow tightened. The confidence in her posture shifted just slightly, but enough. What is this? She asked, though the answer was already in front of her. I turned, then finally meeting my father's gaze. You should probably read it too, I said. He didn't move right away. But he didn't look away either. And for the first time since I'd stepped back into this house, he looked afraid. Linda stared at the first page like the words had rearranged themselves into a language she couldn't understand. The folder trembled once in her hands. Not much, just enough. My father saw it too. What is this? She asked again, but this time her voice had lost its sharp edge. I stepped onto the porch and picked up another one of my mother's books from the floor. The cover was bent at the corner. I smoothed it with my thumb before placing it back in the broken box. It's the trust agreement, I said, the deed transfer, and the letter Mom's attorney sent after she passed. Linda's eyes snapped up. That's impossible. No, I said quietly. It's inconvenient. There's a difference. My father closed his eyes for half a second. That was all I needed. He knew. Maybe not every detail, maybe not the full strength of it, but he knew enough. Linda turned toward him. Robert. He swallowed his throat, moving with visible effort. Linda? No, she said, stepping closer to him, folder still clutched in one hand. Tell me this isn't real. He didn't answer. The porch seemed to shrink around us. Across the street, Mrs. Donnelly stood behind her curtains, pretending not to watch. A man walking his dog had slowed down at the corner. I could feel their attention, but it didn't embarrass me. Linda had wanted an audience. Now she had one. I reached for the folder gently. May I? She pulled it back like I was trying to steal something. It's a copy, I said. I have originals and certified copies elsewhere. That landed. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. So I continued. My mother placed the house in the Carter family trust before she died. I was named sole beneficiary after I turned 25. Dad was granted residential use as long as he maintained the property and didn't attempt to sell, transfer, or encumber it without trustee approval. Linda shook her head slowly. No, Robert owns this house. He lives in this house, I corrected. That's not the same thing. She looked at my father again, desperate now, not angry, not yet. Desperate. You told me this was our home." My father's face had gone pale. The man who once taught me how to fix a bike chain, how to check the oil in a car, how to stand up straight when shaking someone's hand, stood there looking like a stranger trapped inside his own silence. "It was complicated," he said. Linda's laugh came out cracked. "Complicated?" I looked at him. "You let her believe she had the right to throw me out." His eyes met mine briefly, then dropped. I didn't think it would go this far. That sentence was almost worse than a confession. Because it meant he had seen it building. He had watched the photographs disappear, watched my room become a guest room, watched my mother's memory get boxed up and pushed into the garage. And he had told himself each step wasn't far enough to stop. Linda flipped through the pages faster now, panic replacing arrogance. "This can't be enforceable, there must be something." "There is," I said. She froze. I took one step closer, keeping my voice level. "There's a clause about hostile occupancy and material interference with the beneficiary's access to the property." My father flinched. Linda looked at him sharply. "You knew about this." He didn't answer fast enough. That answer was enough. Her face changed then, not softened, not remorseful, exposed. Like someone had yanked open a curtain behind her and shown all the wires holding up the performance. "You let me pay for renovations," she whispered. My father rubbed his hand over his mouth. "We paid for renovations." "With my savings," she snapped, "with my decisions, with my name on every contractor call." "And none of that gave you title," I said. She turned on me. "You planned this." "No," I replied. "You planned this. I just kept the paperwork." The wind moved across the yard, lifting one loose page from a notebook that had fallen out of my box. It skittered across the porch until it hit my boot. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Linda's expression hardened again, but it was different now. Not power, survival. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything?" I looked at the broken box at my feet. "I didn't walk in and take anything. I came home. You threw my belongings onto the lawn." "This is Robert's home," she said. I turned to my father. "Is it?" He looked at me, then truly looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame, yes. Fear, definitely. But beneath it, grief, old grief, the kind he had never learned to carry without turning it into cowardice. "Emily," he said softly, "your mother wanted you protected." "I know." "She didn't do it to hurt me." "I know that too." His voice broke slightly. I thought if I explained it to Linda, she would feel like she didn't belong here. I gave him a long, steady look. "So you made me feel that way instead." That was the sentence that finished him. His shoulders dropped. Whatever defense he had left disappeared. Linda stared at him, stunned, not because of my pain, but because his silence had finally chosen a side and it wasn't hers. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a second document folded cleanly. "This is a notice from the trust attorney. I asked him to prepare it after I saw what happened to my room and Mom's things." Linda looked at the paper like it was a weapon. "In plain terms," I continued, "you have 30 days to vacate unless I choose otherwise. Dad's residential privilege can be reviewed because he allowed interference with my access and failed to preserve trust property." My father whispered Emily. I held up one hand, not harshly but firmly. "I'm not throwing anyone onto the street tonight. I'm not Linda." Her eyes flashed with humiliation. "Good. But the locks will be changed on spaces containing trust property. My mother's belongings come back inside. My room is restored. And nothing else leaves this house without my approval." Linda laughed, once bitter and breathless. "You sound like a soldier giving orders." I looked at her. "No, I sound like the owner." The words landed cleanly. Her face drained. Behind her, my father leaned one hand against the doorframe, as if the house he had failed to protect was suddenly the only thing holding him upright. I picked up my mother's books one by one, placing them carefully back into the box. Then I lifted the box into my arms and stepped toward the doorway. Linda didn't move. So I stopped directly in front of her. "You were right about one thing," I said quietly. "This house does belong to real family." Her mouth tightened. "But real family doesn't erase the dead, abandon the living, and call it moving on." She stepped aside. "Not much. Just enough." And I walked back into my mother's house while my father stood silent behind me, finally understanding that silence had cost him everything. For the first time since I had come home, Linda didn't follow me. She stayed on the porch with the folder in her hand, staring at pages that had turned her certainty into dust. My father remained near the doorway, one hand against the frame, his face drained of color. He looked older than he had that morning. Older than he had any right to look after years of letting other people carry the weight he refused to lift. I carried my mother's books inside. One box, then another. I didn't slam doors. I didn't shout. I didn't give Linda the satisfaction of seeing rage. There is a certain kind of power in refusing to perform pain for the people who caused it. So I moved carefully, deliberately placing each box in the living room where my mother's piano used to stand. The piano was gone. That hurt more than I expected. I stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space along the wall. When I was a child, my mother used to play hymns on Sunday mornings, not because she was especially religious, but because she said old songs made a house remember its manners. I could almost hear the notes, now faint and distant, buried under years of silence. Behind me, my father stepped inside. "Emily," he said. I didn't turn around. "Where's the piano?" He went quiet. That told me enough. "Linda sold it," he said finally, "a few years ago." I closed my eyes once, just once. "Did you stop her?" "Number." "Of course." I opened one of the boxes and lifted out a framed photograph, my mother on the porch, laughing, one hand raised to block the sun. The frame was dusty, but the glass was still intact. I set it on the mantel. My father watched, his jaw working as if words were trying to climb out and failing. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the smallest sentence in the world, too small for what it was supposed to carry. I looked at him then. "For what?" He blinked. "For the room," I asked. "For the pictures. For letting her throw my things outside. For pretending you didn't know what Mom left me." His shoulders sagged, all of it. I wanted that to be enough. A part of me, the daughter who had waited years for him to choose me without being forced, wanted to accept it right there, to make the moment soft, to let him step back into the role of father because it would be easier than standing in the truth. But I wasn't 8 years old anymore. And he wasn't the man in those photographs. "I needed you to speak before the paperwork did," I said. His face tightened. "I know," he whispered. Linda entered then, no longer polished, no longer in control. She had taken off the mask of the homeowner and replaced it with something colder. Wounded pride. "You're really going to do this?" she asked. I looked at her calmly. "Yes, after everything your father and I put into this place." "You put money into walls," I said. "My mother put protection into them." Her mouth twisted. "You think that makes you noble?" "No," I answered. "It makes me prepared." She glanced toward my father, waiting for him to intervene. For once he didn't. That silence was different from all the others. It didn't protect her. Linda seemed to understand it at the same time I did. Her face changed, not into regret, but into calculation. "Fine," she said. 30 days, right?" 30 days, I confirmed. She nodded sharply. "Then don't expect kindness from me." I almost smiled. I stopped expecting that a long time ago. The following days were strangely quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. Linda moved through the house like a tenant who had been denied ownership of her own performance. She made phone calls behind closed doors. She packed selectively at first, then more seriously when the attorney sent formal confirmation. My father slept in the downstairs den. I didn't ask why. I restored my mother's photograph to the hallway. Then my own. Not because I needed to prove I belonged there, but because the house had been forced to lie for too long. On the 10th day, my father found me in the garage sorting the last of my mother's things. He stood at the entrance for a while before speaking. "Your mother knew I was weak." I paused, one hand resting on a cardboard box. "She knew I loved you," he continued, "but she also knew I avoided hard things. I used to resent her for setting up the trust. I thought it meant she didn't trust me." I looked at him. "Maybe she knew you too well." He nodded slowly, tears gathering but not falling. Maybe she did. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. Not exactly. I felt tired. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes when someone finally tells the truth after you've already survived the lie. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on you." His eyes lifted. "You can stay involved in my life," I said, "but not as a man hiding behind someone else's cruelty, And not in this house unless you understand what it costs to be here. He took that in, no argument, no excuse. Just a nod. Linda left on the 27th day. No dramatic goodbye, no apology. She supervised the movers with a tight mouth and hard eyes. When she reached the front door for the last time, she turned back and looked at the hallway where my mother's photo now hung. "You'll be lonely here," she said. I stood at the foot of the stairs. "No, I'll be honest here." She had no answer for that. After she was gone, the house breathed differently. I don't know how else to explain it. The rooms didn't magically heal. The missing piano didn't return. Years of silence didn't vanish because the locks changed. But the air felt lighter, as if the walls no longer had to brace themselves for another performance. That evening, my father and I stood on the porch while the sun dropped behind the oak tree. He didn't ask to come back inside. I respected that. "I should have protected you," he said. "Yes," I replied. He nodded, accepting the word like a sentence. Then he said, "Your mother would be proud of you." I looked toward the front window where the light caught the edge of her photograph inside. "No," I said softly, "she would be relieved." Months later, I kept the house. Not as a monument, not as revenge. As a promise. I painted the guest room back to a color close to what it had been when I was young. I donated some of the furniture Linda left behind. I found an old upright piano from a retired music teacher 2 towns over and placed it against the wall where my mother's had stood. It wasn't the same. But it was honest. And sometimes that is enough. If this story made you think about family loyalty or the quiet cost of staying silent, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me whether you believe a house can hold the truth long after people try to bury it. We have many more stories like this to share, so subscribe and stay with us for the next one.